So we talked quite a lot about systems level change. We've talked with Alex and with Rachel. We've talked about the way that you need to, or you can bring different perspectives, artistic perspectives to bear already. I think we're extraordinarily delighted in the Clusters programme that two of the investments are directly in fashion. You just saw a video there specifically around fashion, where the impact of technology, the impact of new opportunities, but also the impact of the global impact of fashion, a massive industry for the UK, but also a massive fashion has been overlooked, generally speaking, in policy and investment terms, unacceptably. For quite a long time, so it's wonderful to have such strong representation from fashion here. I know nothing about fashion, as you can probably tell. I just wear a black suit on all occasions. So, although that is a choice, so maybe I know a tiny bit about fashion. So I'm going to go off the stage now and hand over to people who actually know what they're doing and talking about fashion. So Lynda Petherick is going to chair what I hope and I believe will be an extremely insightful panel of fashion experts. Lynda has spent 20 years in innovation in sort of disruptive sectors across the economy. She is the fashion and luxury fashion lead at Accenture in the UK. Last couple of years, I think that's been her main focus, but she is very much somebody who's looked at disruption, at digital technology across sectors, and now finds herself in this context of fashion. So as I say, I'm going to hand over to Lynda, and she's going to take you through a panel session with some really extraordinary contributors. Lynda, welcome to the stage, please. Nice to see you.
Great, thank you.
Enjoy.
Thank you. So morning everybody, it's just about still morning. So delighted to be here today, and I do have a very illustrious panel to join me up here on stage. So I'm going to bring them on with no further ado. So they have such fabulous role titles, I'm afraid I've written them down. So firstly, can we, Steve Russell, so Professor Steve Russell, who is the Textiles, Materials and Technology Lead from the University of Leeds. So welcome to the stage. Jane Harris. So Jane is Professor of Digital and Design and Innovation and also Associate Dean of Research at the London College of Fashion. Welcome to stage, Jane. Jonathan Chippindale, who is the CEO of Holition, also joining us this afternoon. Jennifer Davies, who is the Commercial Director of Nayal, which is a very exciting emerging fashion brand, and also Caroline Rush, who is the Chief Executive of the British Fashion Council. So welcome to stage, Caroline. So how we're going to do this for the next kind of 50 minutes or so is Caroline is really going to bring to life what it really means to us and feels to us as a sector in terms of redesigning essentially what needs to be done at the industry level to really embrace the real seismic change that's happening out there when we think about the consumer landscape. Then what we're going to do is going to have a panel conversation very much focused around a number of key themes and trends, and with a panel that covers so many parts of our industry, I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting and thought-provoking conversation. So let me hand over to Caroline, who's going to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to make sure the slides are going in the right direction. Yes, fantastic. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the British Fashion Council, a bit of insight into some of the challenges that are happening in our industry, what we would like to see the future looking like, and maybe the road that we think that will get us there, and hopefully some of the partners that will come with us. So the British Fashion Council's role is to unlock the potential in the fashion industry, to support creative businesses, to build global reach and global business. We're a not-for-profit organisation which creates a very neutral place where organisations are able to come together, collectively share knowledge, to further the interests of the industry, but also to support those young creative businesses that we're known for here in the UK. As part of this is that we organise global events such as London Fashion Week, I'm hoping you've heard of it, London Fashion Week Men's, and the Fashion Awards, which is the culmination of all of the celebration of creativity and innovation globally that happens here in London each year, 10th of December this year at the Royal Albert Hall. Now, these events reputationally are incredibly important for the UK, incredibly important positioning for British businesses, and they're important because it's where the global industry leaders come to the UK, they see our talent, and it creates incredible platforms to showcase our designer businesses. But along with that, it creates great opportunity to communicate to the consumer, which is part of the challenges that our industry is facing, because those events have gone from being very much trade into things that are a hybrid between trade and consumer-facing activity. We create incredible global impact through these events, and it puts fashion right at the heart of discussions with media, retailers, commercial partners, consumers, fashion fans, as well as government, institutions, and educators, with discussions ranging from reputation, business, and of course, the needs of education, the importance of it in our industry. Is that fashion is about now, it's about newness, it's about zeitgeist, it's about cultural conversation, and that creates an incredible opportunity. So our industry is worth 32 billion to the British economy. We have 890,000 jobs. We generate billions of pounds worth of coverage globally and £1 billion worth of sales. So you can imagine why it's so significant to the reputation, but also to the GDP of the UK. There's a lot of retail tourism created through the fashion industry, and I'm very proud of the fact that we're known globally as being leaders in creative education, and London, as the capital of the UK, is known as the birthplace of talent, so something that our educators should be incredibly proud of as well. But we are an industry that is changing. As I alluded to, is that our big events like Fashion Weeks that used to be about showing collections to a trade audience that would hit both the magazine shelves and the retailers 6 months down the line, are now showing, because of social media and everything being open up, is showing these collections that are reaching the consumer but not being delivered until 6 months later. It's creating an interesting conversation around design, around who's on the catwalk, about diversity, about sustainability, and how you build those into the conversations of what used to be a very simple transactional piece of showing a collection to a fashion-interested audience, industry audience, has very much complicated the opportunities for our designer businesses. Hence, as you can imagine, why having a digital strategy is not only key to the British Fashion Council, but is key to all of our designer businesses as well. Innovation and disruption isn't just happening around these platforms, they're happening in design, fabric, material creation, supply chain, the media and retail experience, and e-commerce has absolutely blown out of the water what used to be the traditional bricks and mortar experience in terms of retail. And looking at how we can connect some of those digital opportunities to the bricks and mortar experience is something that we're very interested in making sure is part of and at the heart of our digital strategy. Omni-channel is essential. This is incredibly important for our designer businesses, and part of that supporting our creative businesses to grow global reach and to grow global impact very much starts with thinking about how those businesses connect to the retailers, connect to the media, something that's incredibly important to them and will continue to be, because they are the tastemakers of our industry. They're the ones that have the experience that helps select them in a very crowded and noisy audience of being part of their business, whether it's the pages of their magazines, whether it's the content of their digital channels. But the influencer is also playing quite a significant role, as you can imagine. The digital influencer is able to shift product, and the connection with the right kind of influencers for the right kind of designers or the right kind of retail businesses is really unlocking potential as well. Peer-to-peer recommendations are another thing that we're seeing very much driven out of the Asian market, but really very much coming into the UK and into the West as well. And that peer-to-peer selling and recommendations is something that's helping build designer profiles and, again, helping sell product, which of course is what the fashion industry is all about in the end. Product, price and service remain key, but how you translate those into omni-channel is something that our designers are very much looking at. The pace of our industry, because of digital, is changing. Everything is accelerated, from getting the product to market, to sustaining the consumer demands, to the media having to not only write and think about the context and the cultural context of collections, but to having immediate commentary on the shows and the product that they're seeing, is making our industry run at an incredible pace. Is that businesses are looking at Instagram-led drops, the reinvention of stores, and of course how data and AI can provide business opportunities, but also is that how they manage that in the context of the challenges around control and of course of security as well. With all this in mind is that we really want to make sure that British fashion and London Fashion Week is right at the forefront of immersive technology and at the forefront of that data and AI opportunity as well. We are leaders. There is no doubt that the UK are leaders in creativity and innovation. And our ambition is that London Fashion Week will be the most technologically advanced. Now, the challenges for us around this is that London Fashion Week's unique position in the global arena is that we have, of course, incredible global fashion brands such as Burberry, who are very future-focused in terms of innovation and technology, but many, many smaller businesses who, although they are digitally native in terms of social, actually being able to have the resources to access these immersive technologies is something that the British Fashion Council hopes to be able to unlock for them, as we did many years back, 10 years ago, when we first allowed them access to things like live streaming, which seems quite a traditional medium to take design out to a global audience these days. So, how are we going to do this? With the resources of a not-for-profit organisation, is we do it as we do our day-to-day business. It's about bringing together a team of those that have incredible expertise and knowledge in the sector. A team that can help us accelerate, that have a very much understanding of the fashion industry, or that can really challenge some of the perceptions that we have in the fashion industry, and how we can take global brand and collaboration and embrace that immersive technology to move the experience of fashion weeks, but also the experience of the consumer in fashion forward. We've had some great opportunities in looking at this, and we put a team together to think about what those chapters of exploration and what that roadmap might look like. So the first, of course, is data insight, something that many of our businesses, particularly retail businesses actually, are clamoring how they manage their data, what insight it can bring to them, and how it can unlock some of that potential for their business. And for us around Fashion Week, thinking about this global conversation that happens, this cultural zeitgeist of events like Fashion Week that look at those moments in time when fashion have particular influence and how that's impacting on the social conversations is something that we've been looking at, and I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. Reach and awareness is, as I've talked about a lot about global events, global reach, is that we are very conscious of the fact that the UK is a small island and that many of our small businesses punch way above their weights. At retail, they sit alongside the global fashion brands from all around the world, and I would say that their creativity and the quality of those designs actually exceed many of their international counterparts. But how do you help build that consumer conversation for businesses that don't have advertising budgets? How do you look at really unique propositions that start that conversation with a retailer, maybe led by the consumer who's found out about a young fashion business that's shown at London Fashion Week that they can't access in Seoul or in Sydney or maybe even New York? So how we really build that reach and awareness is something that's incredibly important to us, and is something that digital and technology can definitely help us unlock. The immersive showcasing we're incredibly excited about. We've had opportunity, and you saw a little bit from the film from Holition there, is we've seen incredible examples of how this can happen at unique shows. But imagine having the opportunity to take an event like London Fashion Week with over 80 different shows, different points of view, different conversations, different collections, and be able to take that to a global consumer through immersive showcasing. It's something we very much hope that here in the UK we're going to be able to do. And we think that we're talking to the right partners to help make it happen. New environments are something that, again, is that we've been looking at. Opportunities for the fashion industry to maybe build revenue streams, to think about maybe crossing over more sort of that design thinking and that creative thinking into other principles, whether that is gaming or other technological spheres. There's many conversations that happen, but being the place where we can actually unlock those quickly, make them happen first, and make the UK be leaders is something that we're incredibly excited about. So I'm going to finish on one project which hopefully will take us into the conversation, which is something that a few of those that are sat on our panel have been involved with. Hang on, I'm going the wrong way. Bear with me. So much for tech. Yes. So we were incredibly fortunate in the run-up to Fashion Week in September to work with an incredible group of partners, including Holition, Google, Condé Nast, Pulsar, to bring together some data from the last 2 Fashion Weeks, to think about those consumer conversations, to crunch it into something that showed how a point in time and a conversation that starts at London Fashion Week around specific themes such as sustainability, diversity, innovation, talent, and how that conversation grows globally through the many strands of communication and digital activation, and the impact that can then have from something that happens here in London in a one-to-one experience, that via that digital conversation and by the imagery and that engagement can grow into a global conversation and demonstrate the impact that our British businesses and the fashion industry can have. It's something that we're looking forward to update, and it's something that we're looking forward to demonstrate further how the broader cultural impact of the fashion sector can really contribute to the British economy. Thank you.
Caroline, hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour in terms of not only the sheer scale of change that as a British fashion industry we've successfully faced into over recent years, but also the scale of transformation that we need to embrace to take us forward. So I'm going to start, Jennifer, you know, as a kind of registered director for a new kind of emerging brand, do you feel that it's a case of evolution or revolution as you look into the scale of change ahead?
Yes, so I work with a designer called Nabil Nayal, so we're just in our 3rd year of business, and he actually just completed a practice-based PhD where disruption was one of the main themes throughout, so I think whether I like it or not, firmly in the revolution camp, but you know, that really threads through everything we do with the business, and having worked in the music industry, I've seen firsthand what happens when you don't get ahead of the game and think ahead. So we very much feel it's important to be at the forefront of change and embracing innovation, so yeah.
And could you give us any insight into any specific revolution idea you're working on? Yeah,
so I mean, we've actually just applied for Innovate UK funding in partnership with the University of Liverpool, and Farfetch and IBM have also agreed to be advisors on the project if we're successful, looking at the application of blockchain technology, which those may or not be aware, probably heard it in relation to Bitcoin a lot and cryptocurrencies, but we're now seeing the application of it in supply chain context. So again, it has the potential to revolutionise the fashion supply chain and offer a lot more in the way of transparency. So yeah, we just did a project, our first presentation at London Fashion Week in collaboration with the British Library. And so, for example, this is a 16th century map, believe it or not. And so blockchain would give us the potential to show the IP, that this belongs to the British Library, through all the raw materials, the steps in the supply chain. So we're really looking at embracing that technology.
And I think, you know, from a blockchain perspective, and you've sort of touched on the whole piece around sort of sustainability and traceability around products. I wonder, Steve, whether you can give us your perspective on how, as an industry, we're sort of facing into that entire area, as it's obviously been in the press, increasing frequency over recent weeks and months.
In terms of sustainability?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read a BBC report, was it last week, that said the most frequently used word this year, I think Collins Dictionary had done a survey, and it was single use. So we know things become a problem when they come into the public consciousness. So we've known in this industry that there are challenges in the sustainability area, and now it's front and centre and it needs to be dealt with. And it will require the whole industry to change and to have some vision about what the future is going to look like. It also needs to take into account that fundamentally our products still need to work. And that is a major challenge from a technology point of view. And the other issue is around collection systems. And I think one of the things that we're quite interested in, and we've seen some opportunity to develop, is also thinking around what happens when that waste is collected. So there are no processes that will allow you to extract value from waste. So instead of thinking of it as a low-grade problem that somehow we need to completely eradicate, for that waste that is still produced, there are opportunities to make high-value products and use less virgin material in the first place. So I think that, from a circular economy perspective, as we move from this linear model of buying, using and disposing to one where we keep materials into circulation for as long as possible, there are now real opportunities, not just to show that that's possible technically, but to actually turn it into something that can be economic and also lead to employment and deal with some of the challenges we have, for example, in this country with fast fashion in particular. So I think the conversation is going to go on for some time yet. It's not going to be solved very quickly, but there are some really exciting opportunities on the horizon.
And I think, Jane, you, in your recent sort of clusters piece, you've also had a chapter or a component around this sustainability area. I don't know if you want to just build on what Steve's been talking to.
Well, I mean, the materiality of fashion is really fascinating. I'm not a fashion person, I have to say, so that makes my position quite interesting. My background's in textiles, and from that perspective, really, when you begin to look at the extent of the material opportunities in that space, which we are very good at in the UK. I mean, we described our cluster's bid literally straddling everything from agriculture to advertising, and I think actually that message was also as much to try and help those that don't necessarily see past the frock to consider actually the expansive range of this industry. You know, it literally is. We are growing and really thinking about what new materials opportunities offers to us, in addition to, you know, what Steve was talking about, looking at what we currently have and how we manage that. So that just alone is a massive area of research, and that means really joining the dots across a whole range of sort of transdisciplinary conversations, which we have been doing for some time, but we've never really had the opportunity to bring it together. I think, and we might be talking about this later, but then when you look at young businesses coming through, they're kind of already on the page. We see that our students are telling us how to do it from every possible aspect, which is great, and that's a good position to be in. But that also means that how do we get them out there? How do we make them successful as young businesses? Because the fashion world is a very, very hard one to succeed in business terms. So the support mechanisms, you know, that the British Fashion Council provides, for example, and all the various networks that sit around that are going to be vital. And that access to technology, whether it is linking into agriculture and having real agency in terms of the future technologies that we develop, are really going to be the USP of our future SMEs. And I think that's what this clusters initiative offers particularly.
And Caroline, just sort of set out, so it might be helpful for everyone from a context perspective, what from the British Fashion Council perspective you're doing in this regard at the industry level. I think it might just be worth helping kind of bring that to life for people.
Cool. So we have an initiative that runs right through our business called Positive Fashion. There are 3 strands to it. One which is around people, as you can imagine. 2 is around ethics and sustainability, and then the 3rd is really local manufacturing and craft. And as I've shared, is that what we do is we try and bring sort of the expertise of the sector together to share that more broadly with the industry. And particularly around sustainability, there's a real willingness for open source and for making sure that anything that has been learned is shared with the industry to help take those positive steps forward. As you said, is that the young businesses coming through is that absolutely have already set the parameters around they want their businesses to be more sustainable, they want the transparency, they want material innovation, and that they're pushing that agenda, which is fantastic to see.
And if we think about some of the larger kind of fashion businesses, you know, so from a research perspective, how do you think that you can sort of best collaborate and bring all that learning and research that's been developed over, you know, many, many years to actually make that change within those larger kind of organisations in the fashion sector? I'll probably to Jane first and then Steve.
We were talking about this earlier because it doesn't matter which brand you look at what level, whether it's luxury, high street, or however you want to describe it, they are all producing enormous quantities of stuff. And whether it's about selling it, promoting it, retail, the kind of technologies that you use for that, or the sustainability issues, the challenges are genuinely immense. And that actually creates a very interesting space for research. I mean, never before have we had to work across so many different sectors: chemical engineering, materials engineering, computer sciences. We are doing that. As I said, we've just never really had the chance to sort of describe that and draw it together, I think, in the way that we can, and then make that accessible to the next businesses coming through. I think the culture that we're in, though, now, from the perspective of the bigger brands, is really quite exciting, because we've been knocking on the door of this as researchers for like 20 years, kind of saying, come on, we need to be doing either AR, VR, blockchain, whatever is the next thing, sustainable materials. But it's hard because, their bottom line is the priority, and until their consumer says that they need something different, then it's very difficult. It's understandable why it's hard for them to change, but I think we're now in a moment of change. They're definitely knocking on all of our doors, and that's really important. The planet can't continue on this trajectory. That's the bottom line, really. And when you start looking at, we've been doing projects in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, the imperative environment is very stark, but people still want fashion, and there's no reason why the two can't coexist. So I think that's what's really exciting about this opportunity.
Steve?
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. And I'd also say there's an increasing interest in shorter supply chains, and shorter supply chains often means automatically higher standards in terms of sustainability. So in the UK, contrary to what many people might believe, there's still a huge amount of textile material designed and manufactured here. And those companies, many of them are exporting over 70% of what they produce and design here. And why are they doing that? Because their products are designed under a certain framework that gives people confidence. So I think another opportunity, problems and opportunities, another opportunity is as we move closer to doing something concrete, increasingly over the challenges around sustainability, that we harness our local supply chains, our local design and manufacturing talent and capability, both from micro businesses all the way up to larger businesses. Burberry is one company, for example, which is a member of our cluster who employs, I think, nearly 1,000 people in our region, both designing and manufacturing. Those outputs are exported all over the world. So there are models that work, and I think the other issue is to really make change. A lot is said about retail, and we certainly can't underestimate the importance of retail. But the other very important consideration is the supply chain, and if we are going to become a more sustainable industry, if we are going to become more agile, if we are going to be more competitive, then the supply chain needs to come with everyone else, even if it's retail driven. Otherwise, the change will be partly restricted. The speed of change will be partly restricted. So I'll just add that, I think, as my main
Thanks, Steve. And so it's going to change a bit of tack now, just back to almost that kind of topic around more on the revolution, and think a little bit about kind of technology in its broadest sense. So, Jonathan, as we sort of think into sort of the changing consumer and the demands made of the customers across the fashion sector, what's your perspective on almost what's next in terms of what our consumers are going to be demanding of us?
That's great. We'll talk about that. But just one of the things I thought was so interesting back on sustainability was the project that you referenced, Caroline, that we did with you at London Fashion Week, which was a data scraping tool that allowed the British Fashion Council to listen to the background noise of consumer conversations on social media around the pillars that Caroline was talking about. And one of the insights that I took out of it, one of many insights, was that if you look at consumer conversation around an issue of sustainability, actually year on year it's gone down. Now, that's not that it's gone down, that it's not important. Quite the opposite. It's actually becoming a hygiene, and that people aren't talking it now, they're actually doing it. And then the challenge then is for brands to be able to deliver a product that feeds into a demand that is there, that many of the brands that we talk to are aware of, but haven't really got their supply chain right yet. So I think that's an interesting area, and sustainability is now being replaced by diversity as one of the hot topics. In terms of evolution versus revolution, it's a topic that we often hear from our brands, from our clients in luxury fashion and beauty. And of course, it's always posited in a very binary way as either or. And as with almost every binary decision making that I've ever come across, it's actually linear and you need both. And I think one of the reasons why we need both is that, and again, it sounds really slightly trite to even talk about this now, but 10, 12 years ago, while it might have been acceptable for one of our clients, a very, very well-known member of a very, very well-known fashion brand, to tell me that, Jonathan, all this is very interesting, but until somebody can prove to me that the internet will still be here in 3 years, we're not going to go off and do anything mad and crazy in digital. Over the last 10 to 15 years, digital has invaded pretty well every aspect of a brand, and it's a thing now, and whether it's in terms of engagement in store, online, on mobile, in third space like pop-ups, or in home, whether it's around content and theatre, whether it's around rational, whether it's around sales, and e-commerce, whether it's around social media, whether it's around all the back-of-house supply chain management, and through artificial intelligence, understanding about trend and data and customer, it's absolutely everywhere. But when we look at revolution versus evolution, the issue with evolution is that it needs to, by definition, evolve. And the first aeroplane, the first television, the first computer were nothing. The first iPhone were not as powerful as they are now. And evolution, therefore, takes time, and time equals money. And a lot of brands are wary about embarking on very long-term financial investments, particularly when, as an organization, they're predicated on 1 year fiscals, and they can't spend into the next year's fiscal. So it's quite difficult, and that's why a lot of brands typically move into lots of little sort of revolution type ideas, and actually particularly in the fashion industry, which as an industry is predicated on reinventing itself on a regular basis. So there's not a huge amount, I think, of evolution being currently practiced within the fashion space. There's lots of conversations with startups, new technologies. What can I do on the catwalk this year? What can I do in my shop next year? Like matches, they burn bright and then they burn out, but they generate PR and marketing. Interestingly, a lot of the long-term evolution comes from academia, where actually organizations are not restrained by those 1 year fiscals, where they have students working with them on long courses, where PhDs take many years, where actually the academic institutions are very interested in the human and less interested in the brand. And therefore, a lot of the conversations that we have with organizations such as LCF are about those long-term evolutionary technologies such as virtual fit, virtual try-on, things such as that. And brands, the smart brands, are the ones that are doing both. They are talking to the startups, but they're also working deeply with academia and getting an answer which is both.
And if you're going to from an industry perspective, and then just also sort of thinking about the audience, what practical tips would you give in terms of how to engage with an industry and get that right? Because I think there is something kind of practical in terms of how you approach that in a way that works effectively and one that is less sustainable. So what would your views on that be, Jane?
Time. I mean, a lot of what Jonathan's talking about, I think we've been, the brands that we're working with across our partnership, we've worked with for many years. Again, we've never really had the opportunity to really build on that and make it this particular kind of package, but now is the right time, and we've spent a lot of time working with brands, listening to them, listening to what they want, which was very fortunate given the fast turnaround of this bid process, I have to say. And I think that was quite telling. You know, we kind of knew what was needed, even if we hadn't quite formally had the conversations yet needed to scribe what we would do with them going forward, and actually giving them agency in this academic context, which has been said many times across earlier today and across the day, is that the real purpose of this is really to think about, you know, our academic position and the agency that we support and provide industry in that space leading this conversation. I think in that respect, what's really interesting about this particular sector is how many other sectors it ripples into, you know, from literally automotive design to medical areas. For example, we've got PhD students that are working right across these transdisciplinary areas, but they're rather hidden, and yet they're working with high-level experts and expertise that is also going to come back into what we widely understand the fashion industry to be. So in a way, this is really just the beginning, you know, to do something really substantial. I think it's great that there's more than one cluster in the field. I wouldn't have anticipated that. That's not a norm for us, and that's marvellously ambitious. And I think across all the networks that support this field that we're widely in, I think, you know, collectively we can really see how we can propel this sector, and in all the areas that I think we knock onto and butt into and transfer with. So it's extremely exciting.
And Jennifer, you know, you've already kind of explained earlier the fact that this is something very much you embraced as a brand already, in terms of really seeing the need to kind of revolutionise from day one and the kind of connection into research. I wonder if you could shed a bit more light around what the kind of thinking was behind that and why that's sort of been key to the success.
Yeah, so I think you know, one of the great things about the application is it's brought together lots of different, you know, I guess people within the consortium with different strengths and skills. So we're actually teaming up with both the management school at the University of Liverpool and also the Surface Science Centre, which is part of the science faculty. So looking very much at an area of technology called spectroscopy, which is essentially being able to chemically analyse fabrics and dyes. And so I think that collaboration has really been such a source of energy for the whole project, and I think regardless of whether we get the funding or not, we'll definitely work together in some way. But yeah, I think that's been
fabulous. And if we can say, just Steve, just the other aspect from it, kind of, you know, Jonathan obviously sharing us some of the views around the kind of technology aspect around the sort of changing consumer within your perspective and what, you know, what you're doing from the University of Leeds. I wonder if you could kind of bring some light in terms of some of the things that you're working on with kind of your students in university that is transforming how we look at the world from a fashion perspective.
Yeah, sure. I think just maps back onto a little bit onto the previous question in terms of R&D as well. I think and working with companies. So we are very much we work with companies a lot, and fundamentally they don't always know. And I can say this as someone who also works in a company. So I think it's difficult always to ask a company, what do you want? But what they can often tell you is what their challenges are. And you need two things to take the project forward. You need to be really working with an unmet need, and you need to be able to finance that process. And without an unmet need, financing the process can be a challenge. So this is something which is part of that dialogue with our collaborators and with students. But you know, if you think about some of the technology challenges, and you think about the impact, one of the things that many of our companies struggle with is digital communication. So if you're working in an international world, we heard earlier about digital communication at retail to some extent, but digital communication in the supply chain is a real challenge. So if you're designing a fabric, if you're designing a yarn, before you even get to the final garment, your customer might be in Hong Kong, might be in Japan. So how do you digitally communicate how something feels without sticking 43 samples in the post or going on a plane to go and have a conversation? One of the companies I spoke to said that it takes us 9 months to get a design freeze. If we could shave 1 month off we could increase our revenues by 20%, because the systems that we have in place to make that happen wouldn't be tied up with one customer, right? So that's actually a really difficult challenge, and it's more difficult than I, with my academic hat on, would come up with. And that's what I love about those industrial challenges. Often they're more complicated because they have boundary conditions, and they're more challenging, but therefore they're more exciting, and the impact of achieving them is much higher. So that's one area. And another area that we're really interested in as well is trying to design products first right time for the right customer. And this is where having unrivaled insights into customer preferences, both B2B and B2C, is really important. And it can have really meaningful impacts in terms of the time it takes from initial concept design to finished product. And we're trying to embed, one of our real thrusts really is to embed this sort of thinking into the way that we teach and educate designers of the future, so that they have the tools and understanding to address those sorts of challenges, so that they're ready to enter the world of work when they graduate. So the research is dropping straight into education, which I think is important to sustain the growth in the future as well.
Yes, and I think, building on that, there's also an element of that which is the whole data piece, which is understanding kind of not just the consumer behaviours and trends, but ultimately, and you touched on it earlier when thinking about sustainability, but ultimately, the extent to which something is going to sell, and that you can use the data and insights and then drawing that in through the varying channels, so that actually you design sort of product right first time, which I think is, part of what you're building on. Jennifer, from a kind of blockchain perspective, and also more broadly from your design, have you gone into that dimension in terms of how you take the commentary around sort of social and feeds into how you design? Is that part of what you're thinking through?
Not so much as yet, to be perfectly honest. We've been much more looking at the tracking of raw materials, but obviously, as Steve pointed out, it's thinking about, well, how can we minimise waste? And that's by using these very powerful data analytics to understand what the consumer is wanting. But then I guess the dilemma is you look at an industry like luxury, where the role of brands is to sometimes delight and surprise the customer with things that they don't actually know that they want until they see it. So I think it's striking that balance of creating without boundaries and limitations, but then also not wasting.
Absolutely. And Caroline, you travel the world almost on a near continuous basis, seeing what fashion, what's happening on the global scale. So what would you say in terms of what's happening here from a UK perspective when we think about, the industry transformation, particularly thinking on the technology side of things? What would you say that is special about what we're creating here in the UK that I think is worth having more of a conversation around?
Yeah, I think is that the difference for businesses here in the UK from a fashion design perspective is that they're very entrepreneurial, and we have such a wealth of small businesses that can adapt really easily. As I think it was Jonathan you were alluding to, is that the amount of time of change it takes in some of the bigger organisations means that by the time they've got to the decision-making process, they're almost behind. And unless they've embedded from the leadership position around that change, that kind of thinking, it can be quite a challenge, whereas smaller entrepreneurial businesses can pivot quite quickly, and they can respond to opportunities, to data insights, and embed that within the business, and that becomes really exciting. We had an interesting conversation with it was one of our high street retailers who were working with someone who was sort of crunching some of the data around returns and design, and there was something, it was sort of a detail that was on the shoulder. Every time they designed something with detail on the shoulder, the product always got returned. Yet they couldn't embed it within the design team that just stopped designing anything, because the design team were going, it's about surprise and delight. So there is a balance between the two, I think, but really understanding, that data and putting it into just practical applications for businesses is an easy win, isn't it?
It is, and I know there's been a lot of conversation about, from an RFID perspective, and I'm sure many of you are involved in RFID initiatives, but, getting it down to the thread level, which is a very exciting development when we start thinking about sort of traceability and through into the blockchain.
Exactly. When we went to IBM, they were talking about crypto anchors, which are obviously minute computers, essentially, that could get threaded into garments. And when you think of the potential of that, it's incredible, really.
Absolutely. And have either of you been involved at all in this whole piece around putting the RFID down into the thread level as part of your research projects at all?
Yes, I mean, one of the, we might be coming on to talk about problems, I'm not sure, but one of the areas that we've been looking at in terms of smart technologies is embedding technology, soft technology that will allow you to have an immersive experience when you approach the garment because of what is effectively an embedded QR code within the yarn itself, not within the fabric, within the yarn, so the subunit below. And that is a really useful way of a manufacturer communicating its story. That would be to the final consumer, potentially, and the backstory. So, yes, I think with smart technologies, you have to be very careful because you can do lots of things which are where you can embed electronics and computer systems within garments. You have the problem then of energizing it without it lasting 5 minutes and walking around with a huge battery pack on a skateboard. And then you have the issue of so what at the end? Is there a real purpose for doing this, or is it just interesting? So I think we've been through a long, interesting period, and now we're starting to see real opportunities. The other one is in healthcare, of course, because remote monitoring means reduced costs in healthcare potentially, because you can be monitored and diagnosed remotely, and that has a major economic impact as well as an impact on the patient in terms of their liberation from hospital. So yes, that is an area that we're quite active in, picking out those areas of opportunity where, again, we are trying to solve an unmet need rather than trying to demonstrate a capability.
Which I think is a key theme in all of this, and the conversation we were having earlier around the sustainability, the connecting through to blockchain, and the embedding of RFID at the thread level actually solves a business problem in terms of showing that traceability all the way back ultimately to the factory, which I think is the part of the conversation we've been having, which is it needs to be solving the industry problem, and we're hearing loud and clear that there's absolutely the industry problem, which gives obviously a fabulous opportunity for research universities and such the like to be at the heart of solving for that.
And I think bringing sustainability into that is then the challenge as well, because we've been the wearable technology issue, for example, has been hugely problematic because you're kind of more beholden to industries then that are creating technical gimmicks that we somewhat have been tripwired by as an industry in a broadly fashioned sector, and to provide agency to this industry, so that they are involved in the designing and invention of materials with a sustainability hat on from the outset will prevent a lot of these problems. And we should add that technology also includes the crafts, the making, and the value built into things that we did for many, many centuries that we're actually trying to bring back again, because actually they're incredibly valuable, the knowledge base from those processes in developing new technologies. So there's a real mix of stuff in there, which is the business of what we're in, but it's complex.
Absolutely. So we're out of time, but I thank you, panel, for a very interesting conversation. Hopefully it's been an enlightening insight into the fashion world. So thank you very much.
Thank you.